Well, good afternoon, anybody who may be listening. I'll put my dark glasses on because of my roving, strange eye. It looks a bit uncomfortable. So the phrase came to my mind this morning, Rupert the Lionheart. I think it's a fitting phrase. But I didn't know anything about Richard the Lionheart, so I went and looked him up on Wikipedia the way that one does with a measure of skepticism. But, it's a good basic source to find out what's what. And he was the King of England in the 1100s. He was made king. And the interesting stories to me about him was that there were Jewish dignitaries that came into the palace at the time of his incoronation, and they were thrown out, stripped. I don't know whether that means made naked or just their robes taken off them, and flogged, and then deported, because it was not legal under British law, under English law, I should say, to have Jews in attendance at the coronation. So they were trying to inveigle themselves into the court, I suppose. This was the risk. And they're not welcome. And so he acted well. And there followed a period of persecution, according again to Wikipedia, of Jews in England, resulting in some 100 or so deaths up and down the country, murders, you could say. And the king was displeased with this when he saw this. It had been rumoured that the king had ordered it, and he had not. And so he made a proclamation. I think he hanged some of the perpetrators, and he set the record straight. But and he went on to fight the Crusades and various things. It seems that he was indeed, a rightful king, as far as I can tell from just a few minutes of looking at his history as reported. So I'm not sure, but this was a very early king of England, when England was, more fit for purpose, and our legal system and our the conduct of our society, and the position of the church and the crown in the realm. But the Jews really, we have all this talk about, it's the Jews behind everything, and some people think that and claim it. But, when you start looking at the system of wickedness, that the web of lies and wickedness that seems to be draped over the entire earth, it's hard to attribute it all to the Jews. I don't think, I don't think that's justified at all. And originally, of course, we were the Jews. That's the problem with the word. The Israelites, also called the Jews in the Bible, the true Jews, you could say. But it was the Sanhedrin that condemned Jesus to death, and the Sanhedrin is indeed the sort of the Jewish legal, but the Jewish judiciary, or court, perhaps you could call it. So, there is an historic account to be laid at the door of those people. And sometimes Satan is called the accuser. And I think you could get that also from the book of Job, where Satan is mentioned specifically, and he walks up and down and he's called before the Lord to give an account. And he accuses Job, or he accuses him. He claims that Job is only acting the part of a good man because of the benefits. And he challenges the Lord to say, well, without your hedge around him, if you didn't protect him, then he would soon turn. And he was proven wrong by Job. So there are upright and honest men in the kingdom, not as many as we might think, perhaps, but they exist. And Job was, he ticked all the boxes, and so he's a figure for us of what an honourable and honest man can achieve. He's a figure of righteousness, I suppose. So the accuser is Satan in the book of Job. And really, who was it that accused Jesus Christ? It was the corrupted Sanhedrin, the Jewish court. It was the Jews that did it. The Jews who continued to follow the letter of the law and had transformed the matter of faith and obedience into a legalistic system, which they then, after Jesus was crucified, and in the next few hundred years, they then refined the system and wrote down many more rules and precepts to be observed. The traditions of the elders, the traditions of the fathers, are they called? This was an accusation sometimes made against the Jews, that they were following their legalistic system rather than a godly system. They'd made a counterfeit law, in a manner of speaking. And anybody who's read any part of their books, what's it called now? The Tanakh, of course, is that's the Old Testament. That's the first 5 books of the Bible. And they read the first 5 books of the Bible. And so in doing so, they do well. But they don't find, apparently, officially, they don't find any mention of Jesus Christ. And this is the first problem with the Jews, of course, because they don't recognize the Godship. They don't recognize that Jesus Christ is God. Quite the contrary. They define him to be a wicked, false prophet. And many of them will still stand by the decision to have him crucified. There's no regret in them. The Talmud is the book that they also follow. I've read some parts of the Talmud, and honestly, I just found it so distressing. I didn't really want to read any more. It's a wicked piece of literature, and it has no place in a Christian nation, and those who would follow it, really, they have no place. But I don't think that necessarily means that the Jews have no place. I mean, if If a Jew follows the Torah and reads the Torah and interprets the Torah as he will, but without militancy, as it were, and keeps his beliefs within his own estate, this is allowed by English law. You can't, force somebody to different types of beliefs. It's between a man and his conscience. So, I don't support the indiscriminate persecution of any nation, and certainly not the Jews. We have to use our due process to find any wickedness. If wickedness is found, then punishment must be handed down. But if there's no wickedness, really, a man, I don't think, can be punished for his beliefs alone. That's really would be unjust. But if you then start spreading malicious thoughts and ideas throughout the kingdom, then you're acting outside of the law, because you're creating unrest, and you're practicing the beginnings of sedition, you could say. So I liked Richard the Lionheart, and the way that he treated those Jews, because I don't suppose they came into the palace to the coronation with any good intent, because they would have known that it wasn't permitted. They thought they'd get away with it. If you can get close to power, then you're close to all the good things in life, many people would think. That's the problem. So many people will really spend their lives seeking after fame and fortune, and disregarding, the truly important things. That's why we have to be wary of who is speaking and who is influencing our people, and who our children speak to also. Unfortunately, we really are surrounded by an absolute plethora of false prophets and wicked diviners and witches and warlocks, wolves in sheep's clothing, devouring our nation and devouring our young. But we have Rupert the Lionheart now, a man who stood up and essentially, in spiritual terms, I suppose you could say that his fight is against, again, the Sanhedrin. It's against the Jews. And they will do anything in their power to bring him down. Anything in their power to bring him down, but he will be protected. There are other power structures in the world, but I'm speaking of the Jews because I'm considering us to be Israelites. So the Jews, in the Sanhedrin, originally they're our brethren. And it was Moses that set up the 71 members of the original Great Sanhedrin on the advice of Jethro, his father-in-law. And it was a godly institution. But then, it gets perverted, because wicked men will come in and seek to turn it to their advantage. And there are many such men and women. in the kingdom. And I think they need to remember, that these acts essentially are treasonous. And when a man commits treason in the palace, then the king can indeed instruct one of his men-at-arms to go near to him and to fall upon him. They need to be eradicated at that level. But I'm likewise impressed, of course, with the mercy shown by Richard the Lionheart toward the Jews when he understood that they were being persecuted in the land and he wouldn't allow it. And he stepped in to bring it to an end. A righteous king or a righteous man has to be merciful also, and then that will be seen as a weakness. But now, as more people have started to open their eyes and look a bit more deeply into matters, we understand, I think there's a greater understanding of the complexity and also the simplicity of the situation. It's both complex and quite simple. And also of our responsibility as a nation or as Israelite nations across the world. Remember, we are the shepherd nations. Our actions are important. And, honor is to be an honest and truthful man or woman. These things are very valuable indeed. And so we lead by example. That's how it works. There's a silly anecdote that I think about sometimes because I've meditated upon this matter for a while. In England, it's quite normal to thank the bus driver when getting on and getting off the bus. It's a silly thing. It's not necessary, and I'm sure it's quite irritating for the fellows, but they are thanked. Generally speaking, it's just a word. Hardly uttered as the person leaves the vehicle, or sometimes enters the vehicle if the bus has stopped just for you. It seems to be a friendly gesture. In Italy, it didn't exist. That one of the things that Italians, my daughter and my wife, when they first came to England with me, and they remarked upon this, it was unusual. The relations at the time between the general public and those who drove the fleet of buses run by the Communist Council, relations were not particularly friendly at all. They were more more surly than anything official, but at best. And I like the idea of thanking people, and other people have remarked on it, and they found it pleasant and heartening. Well, now in this country, many of the strangers that live amongst us have taken up this practice also, and I'm pretty sure it's a new one, compared to their own lands, where status dictates, who you speak to, and so on and so forth, and maybe a driver of a bus or something like that would not be in the right caste or something. This concept of civil society that is this Englishness, this fairness that we used to be known for, our fair play. And we need to embody those qualities and display them in the community. We're already looked up to and followed, actually, even though, it would seem quite the opposite at the moment. But it is important that we rise to the occasion. I'm sure, that's it's very detrimental for an Englishman or an Englishwoman to be behaving loudly and badly in the public square. And it does happen, of course. It grieves me to see it. But people don't know any better. They've not been taught by parents, they've not been taught by school, and they've certainly not been taught by the Holy Bible, because that book has been closed in England for many years. The wells are dry. There will be a famine of the word of God. I think that might be in Isaiah, I'm not quite sure. And indeed there has been. But the springs are beginning to flow again, and we're going to see such a blessing and a revival in this country. I'm so sure of it. God bless this day.